The road was dark and empty when the car pulled over. No struggle, no panic, just a quiet stop on the side of a rural highway. She stayed in the driver's seat, legs crossed, as if expecting a conversation, not violence. Moments later, another vehicle stopped behind her. One sound shattered the silence. By sunrise, she was dead. And the truth of what happened on that road was far more disturbing than anyone imagined. Are you ready for the darkest stories Britain has to offer? Introducing our new book, Unreal True Crime, British edition. 35 shocking true murder cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Available now on Amazon in paperback and Kindle, or grab your instant PDF download from our website. Links are in the description below. Don't miss out. Get your copy today. And now, let's continue with today's case. Livy Lewis was born in the small East Texas town of Hemphill into a close family that believed in hard work, education, and staying together. She grew up surrounded by pine trees, dirt roads, and relatives who knew every detail of her life. At the center of that world stood her mother, Darcy, and her grandmother, Janice. They watched her move from a serious little girl into a young woman who wanted to build a future far beyond the limits of a rural county. As a child, she often acted older than her years. She liked plans, lists, and routines. She preferred order over chaos and tried to help at home rather than cause trouble. Money stayed tight in the family, so she learned early that every small job and every bill mattered. Relatives remembered a girl who noticed other people's problems and felt a strong urge to help, whether the person in front of her was a younger cousin, an older neighbor, or a stranger in a store. School gave her a place to prove herself. From the first grade, she brought home strong marks and took pride in them. Teachers saw a student who sat close to the front, did her work on time, and rarely needed reminders. She did not chase attention, but she earned quiet respect. Friends saw a girl who laughed easily in safe company, loved inside jokes, and protected the people she cared about. She chose a small circle, not a crowd, and in that circle she became a steady presence. During her teens, that sense of responsibility grew. At Hemphill High School, she rose to the top of her class. While others talked mostly about parties or leaving town, she focused on assignments, tests, and long-term plans. She joined school activities but never let them overshadow her grades. Teachers saw her as dependable. Classmates knew she was the one who would share notes, help study before an exam, and still hold her own dreams close to her chest. By the later years of high school, she had already chosen a path. She wanted a career in healthcare. Instead of waiting for college, she enrolled in a program that let her train as a certified nursing assistant while still in school. She studied anatomy and basic care, spent hours in clinical practice, and passed the state exam. When she graduated, she did so as an honor student who already held a professional credential and a clear idea of her next steps. After graduation, she enrolled at Stephen F. Austin State University, a regional university only a drive away but a world apart from her small hometown. She started college-level study with the goal of becoming a nurse and later a physician assistant. At the same time, she began working as a nursing assistant at a local facility. Her days filled with classes, her evenings and nights with shifts. The work involved bathing, feeding, and lifting older residents, and she handled it with patience and care. Residents at the nursing home warmed to her quickly. Staff remembered how she spoke gently and tried to preserve dignity in every task. She moved fast but never seemed rushed when a resident needed reassurance. One coworker, Taylor, became especially close. Taylor had a young daughter, and in their friendship, Livy almost took the role of a younger sister. They worked together, supported each other through long shifts, and gave one another a simple sense of family during difficult days. Shortly before the events that later drew public attention, her life followed a demanding but hopeful routine. She attended university classes, studied for exams, worked at the nursing home, and spent limited free time with her mother, grandmother, cousins, and a few close friends. Her dreams stayed clear. She wanted a stable home, a partner who respected her, and a career where she could keep helping vulnerable people. She did not look for drama. She looked for stability. The man who would change her path, Matthew Hoy Edgar, came from the same region and roughly the same world. He also grew up in Sabine County, surrounded by woods and small-town routines. By his early 20s, he had already married a woman named Montana and had two sons with her. People in the area knew him as a local man who drifted between jobs and sometimes drank heavily. He and Livy moved in overlapping social circles long before either of them became central to a criminal case. They met through mutual friends and local gatherings. At first, they were simply part of the same crowd. She was a teenager close to finishing high school. He was a married father. Over time, late-night messages and social media contacts shifted that connection. He paid attention to her, praised her maturity, and made her feel seen. For a young woman who wanted a serious future and a ready-made family, that attention carried weight, even though it came from a man who still lived with his wife. Those first private conversations took place in secret. He told her not to talk about them. She felt guilty and pulled back, not wanting to be the reason a family broke apart. For a while she returned her focus to school and work. Then his marriage fractured under the weight of repeated infidelity. He moved out, acknowledged to his wife that he had cheated, and presented himself to the outside world as a man starting over. Soon, he turned again to the younger woman who had already shown interest. When he approached her this time, he did so as someone who claimed to be free. He had two young sons who needed care. He said he wanted a new life and a real partner. Her desire for stability and family made that story persuasive. They started seeing each other more often. She helped with the boys, cooked, played, and tried to offer them consistency. For a time, it looked as if she had found what she wanted: a home, children to love, and an adult relationship built around shared responsibility. In that early period, there were real moments of happiness. They celebrated small milestones together, visited with his relatives, and spent quiet evenings at home. She decorated the boys' rooms, planned simple routines, and posted photos that suggested a normal blended family. From the outside, some people saw an older man with a younger partner and two children, struggling but trying to manage. From her perspective, she had invested her heart and energy in a serious relationship. The first signs of trouble appeared in small ways. He drank more than she liked and became moody when he did. Jealousy surfaced. He asked about her phone, questioned her friendships, and complained when she spent time with others. He alternated between charm and irritation, between warmth and sudden anger. She explained those changes as stress or alcohol, believing she could help him control his temper if she stayed patient and loving. Over time, those red flags turned into clear warnings. Arguments became more intense and sometimes physical. She sent him messages saying that her body hurt and asking why he kept putting his hands on her. She told him she feared him when he drank. She sent a cousin a photograph that showed her nose swollen and damaged and said it came from a fight with him. Friends noticed bruises, emotional exhaustion, and a level of tension that did not fit a healthy relationship. People close to her grew worried. Her coworker and housemate saw how he behaved when drunk and later described him as abusive in more than one sense. Her cousin told her that the pattern she was living through fit the cycle of domestic violence. Childhood friends urged her to leave and focus on nursing school and work. She heard their concerns but saw the children, the home she had tried to build, and the man who still apologized and promised to change. She stayed. Each cycle followed a similar path. An argument exploded, sometimes with physical violence. She thought about leaving. He cried, said he loved her, swore he would do better, and reminded her of the boys who had grown attached to her. She reminded herself that she had already invested years and energy, and that leaving would hurt more than staying. Again and again, she hoped the caring side of him would win over the violent side. The presence of his ex-wife, Montana, complicated everything further. At first, the two women were on opposite sides of a painful divide. Montana had lost her husband to a younger woman. Livy had stepped into a home that once belonged to another family. Over time, though, a strange form of friendship arose between them. Montana and Livy exchanged messages, spent time together, and began to treat each other as allies rather than rivals. Edgar himself later described them as close. For Livy, that bond felt like progress. She believed that the one person who understood Edgar's worst moments now stood beside her instead of against her. To others, the situation looked unstable and risky. Edgar still held emotional ties to his ex-wife. He moved back and forth between them in his words and actions. On her 19th birthday, he messaged Montana that he had cheated on Livy only with her and not with other women. When that truth surfaced, it caused deep pain and embarrassment for the young woman who had trusted him. By the autumn of 2020, the relationship had reached a critical point. The pattern of jealousy, drinking, physical violence, and temporary reconciliation had repeated many times. She had begun to pull away and even started to see another man who treated her more kindly. She wanted distance from Edgar and a chance to breathe. He struggled to accept that shift. For a man who liked control, the idea of losing a partner who helped with his children and his daily life felt like an attack. In the last weeks before Halloween, phone messages between them showed growing tension. He accused her of betrayal and abandonment. She wrote about fear and the need for change. Around them, the small community moved toward its usual seasonal gatherings, including a pre-Halloween party at the rural home of a friend named Bobby. That party would bring together Edgar, his ex-wife, his children, and the young woman who had tried and failed to change him. On the evening of October 30th, 2020, people gathered at Bobby's property to relax, listen to music, and drink. Among them were Livy, some of her friends, Edgar, Montana, and the two boys. At first, the scene looked like many other country gatherings. Children played. Adults moved between the yard and the house. Drinks passed from hand to hand. Conversations mixed people who had known each other for years. As hours passed and alcohol flowed, the atmosphere changed. Montana and Livy spent more time together, talking and laughing. From witnesses' descriptions, they appeared comfortable around each other. Edgar drank whiskey and beer and grew more withdrawn. He watched the two women who defined his romantic life stand together, and he did not control the situation. His frustration and jealousy simmered beneath the surface. Later that night, after some guests had already left, he learned that Livy might stay and sleep at Bobby's house. In his mind, this possibility joined with fears about another man in her life. His anger erupted. Outside near the vehicles, he confronted Montana. She later said he grabbed her by the neck and tried to choke her. Bobby saw him attack her car, kicking doors and striking windows. He restrained Edgar so that Montana and the children could leave safely. Livy also left the property. Montana drove with the children to the property where Edgar's mother and grandparents lived. Edgar followed there and confronted her again, still drunk and furious, still accusing her of siding with Livy against him. The argument continued on the yard and spilled into the house. Eventually he left, and she stayed inside with the children and his relatives. At that point, phone messages between them took over. He sent angry words, blamed her for the night, and hinted at violence. In those early morning messages, he painted himself as cornered by betrayal. He talked about harming people who, in his view, had ruined his life. Around 3:22 in the morning, he wrote that he was leaving and told her to come for the boys. Investigators later believed that he left the property with his cousin's truck, a rifle, and the intention to confront the young woman who had tried to move on from him. Sometime between that moment and dawn, his path crossed with hers again. She drove along Farm to Market Road 83, a quiet highway east of Hemphill. At some point, her car pulled to the shoulder and stopped. Her body position after death suggested that she remained in the driver's seat with her legs crossed, as if she had expected a conversation, not an attack. There, within a short distance of her front seat, a rifle fired a single shot that entered her neck and killed her. When authorities reconstructed events, they concluded that the rifle used in that shooting belonged to Edgar. Bullet fragments from the car and the body matched test rounds from the weapon recovered nearby. After the shot, her car sat silent on the roadside in the dark. A truck linked to Edgar's family came to a stop behind it. He ended up on the ground between the vehicles, curled on his side, covered in blood from an unexplained source, with no injuries that could account for it. A passing driver discovered the scene shortly after 5 in the morning. The driver noticed the car in an unusual position, stopped, and saw a young woman slumped over the steering wheel. The driver called for help. Emergency responders arrived, checked for signs of life, and found none. They confirmed that she was dead and saw the man on the ground behind her. They sent him by ambulance to a hospital and secured the roadside for investigators. News reached her mother through a friend, not through official channels. Darcy drove toward the flashing lights and patrol cars and tried to reach the officers. For a painful period, no one gave her a direct answer. Only when she saw the car and the way people avoided her eyes did she understand that her only child lay inside, already gone. In that moment, 19 years of plans and dreams broke apart on a 2-lane road. At the hospital, an investigator spoke with Edgar. He said he had drunk heavily at home and remembered lying on his porch, then waking up in an ambulance. He claimed that he did not know how he had reached the scene or what had happened there. Officers collected his clothing and noted the blood on his face and body. They saw that he had no serious wounds. Within hours, they placed him under arrest on a murder charge and began the detailed work of building a case. The autopsy confirmed what the scene had already suggested. A single shot from a high-powered rifle had entered the side of her neck and caused massive damage. The medical examiner also noted signs of blunt force injuries that matched earlier stories of physical abuse. Toxicology tests on her blood did not show anything that would have explained strange behavior on her part. The cause of death was straightforward and violent. Laboratory work on his clothing and the physical evidence added important details and some confusion. A small stain on his pants contained her blood. The blood on his face, however, came from an unidentified third person. On the rifle, investigators did not find usable fingerprints or clear DNA. Some objects from the scene carried mixed DNA profiles that did not match either him or her. The prosecution later argued that these gaps did not erase the larger picture. The defense built much of its argument around them. Digital evidence strengthened the case against him. Phone records and message histories showed his movements the night of the killing and the words he chose in the hours before it. In one crucial message, sent long before the passerby found the car, he replied to a question about where she was by stating that she was already dead. Investigators saw that as proof that he had been present at the moment of death. Voice calls, location data, and timelines pointed in the same direction. Detectives also examined the possibility that Montana had taken part more directly. Some people who supported him tried to shift blame toward her. Investigators interviewed her many times, checked her account against phone data, and used a polygraph as another tool. They concluded that she had remained at the grandparents' property after going inside and that no evidence placed her at the scene on the roadside. Their primary focus stayed on the man who had admitted drinking heavily, who had sent threatening messages, and who had appeared beside the body. Legal delays then collided with emotional urgency. Pandemic conditions slowed court operations across the state. Grand juries met less often. Texas law limited how long authorities could keep a person in jail without an indictment. After about 90 days, a judge had to consider bond. Despite the district attorney's arguments and the family's fears, the court granted bond set at $50,000. Edgar left jail under electronic monitoring, returning to the same small community where the killing had occurred. For the family, his release felt like another blow. They saw him around town. In one incident, her mother encountered him at a store and confronted him in grief and anger. She threw items in his direction and shouted accusations. He reported the confrontation, and officers arrested her. Prosecutors later dropped the charges, but the moment revealed how deep the pain ran on all sides and how small the town remained. In January 2022, the case finally reached trial. He arrived at the courthouse with a protective vest and sat at the defense table. Prosecutors described a pattern of domestic violence and a night of jealousy and rage that ended with a rifle shot. They showed the jury photographs of injuries, the crime scene, and the roadside. They presented the autopsy findings, the ballistic match between the bullet fragments and the rifle, and the text messages that tracked the path from argument to homicide. Witnesses described her as a kind, ambitious young woman who had wanted nothing more than a stable home and a career in healthcare. They described him as a jealous, controlling partner who drank heavily and used his hands to enforce his will. The lead investigator explained the significance of the blood on his pants, the placement of the vehicles, and the time-stamped message that declared her dead before any official notification. The defense tried to plant seeds of doubt. They stressed the lack of fingerprints and DNA on the rifle, the mixed DNA on some items, and the unknown source of blood on his face. They suggested that another person could have handled the weapon or even fired it. They returned again and again to his statement that he blacked out and did not remember the critical moments, hinting that without clear memory, intent might be missing or someone else might be responsible. As the trial unfolded, another twist appeared. After attending the first part of the proceedings, he failed to show up in court. His ankle monitor battery went dead and he vanished. The judge allowed the trial to continue in his absence as the law permitted. The jury stayed in place, heard closing arguments, and retired to deliberate. They returned with a verdict of guilty on the murder charge and recommended a sentence of 99 years in prison and a fine. He now became both a convicted murderer and a fugitive. Law enforcement agencies at local, state, and federal levels worked together to locate him. He appeared on lists of most wanted fugitives. Tips came in, some from faraway states, but in the end, he stayed close to home. In December 2022, officers watched a house near his grandparents' property. saw a man step onto the back porch and recognized him. They moved in and arrested him without incident, ending almost a year on the run. With him back in custody, the court scheduled a formal sentencing hearing. In early January 2023, he stood before a judge who repeated the 99-year sentence directly to him. After that, the court allowed the family to speak. Her grandmother described the girl who had earned top grades, completed nursing assistant training, and started college. Her mother chose to let a recording of her daughter's graduation speech speak for her. The sound of a proud teenager talking about her future filled the courtroom one last time. He then entered the state prison system to begin serving his sentence. Records showed that he would not even become eligible for parole until decades later. For him, daily life narrowed to cells, counts, and long-term confinement. For her family and friends, life became a long process of grieving and remembering. They set up a scholarship in her name to help other local students pursue education, especially in healthcare, so that her passion for caring work would continue in others. The case drew national attention. Media outlets reported on the killing, the trial, his disappearance, and his capture. A television program devoted to true crime included her case in an episode, focusing on his claim of an alcohol-induced blackout while also telling the story of her short life. For the family, every public mention brought both pain and comfort, keeping her name alive while forcing them to relive the worst moments. Over time, her story served as an example of how domestic violence built slowly and then exploded. It showed how control and jealousy often hid behind declarations of love. It showed how hard it was for victims to leave when children and shared towns tied them to abusive partners. It also showed how delays in the legal system could place dangerous people back into communities before trials had a chance to begin. Her family and many supporters hoped that sharing her experience would help others recognize danger earlier. They encourage people to take seriously any signs of control, isolation, sudden rage, or physical harm in intimate relationships, and to reach out for help. They supported the spread of information about local shelters, hotlines, and organizations that helped people leave abusive situations, both in East Texas and elsewhere. As people continued to tell the story of Livy Lewis, they kept the focus on who she had been. A bright, hard-working young woman who loved her family, carried tenderness into her work, and believed deeply in the value of stability and care. The narrative closed with a quiet thank you to everyone who carried her memory forward, and a gentle invitation for listeners to respond with respect, pay attention to the signs of abuse around them, and support those who might be living in fear. In that way, her life, though cut short, continued to protect others. Imagine leaving everything behind: your job, your old life, your heartbreak. Imagine starting fresh in one of the most beautiful places on Earth, a tiny island in Panama where the water is turquoise and the sunsets paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. That's exactly what Yvonne Baldelli did in the fall of 2011. She was chasing a dream, a new beginning, a life with the man she loved. But paradise has a way of hiding its darkest secrets. And on a small island where everyone knows everyone, one woman simply vanished. Her family received emails saying she was fine, that she'd met someone new, that she was traveling through Costa Rica, living her best life. But something didn't feel right, because those emails weren't from Yvonne. They were from her killer. This is the story of Yvonne Baldelli, a woman who went searching for love and adventure, only to find something far more sinister waiting for her in the jungle. Are you ready for the darkest stories Britain has to offer? Introducing our new book, Unreal True Crime, British edition. 35 shocking true murder cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Available now on Amazon in paperback and Kindle, or grab your instant PDF download from our website. Links are in the description below. Don't miss out. Get your copy today. And now, let's continue with today's case. Yvonne Baldelli grew up in Southern California, in the sun-soaked communities that stretch along the Pacific coast between Los Angeles and San Diego. She was raised in an area where opportunity seemed endless, where the beach was never more than a short drive away, and where dreams felt achievable for those willing to work hard enough. And Yvonne worked hard. By all accounts, she was driven, smart, and fiercely ambitious. She was the kind of woman who set goals and then systematically achieved them, who didn't wait for opportunities to come to her but went out and created them herself. She built a successful career in corporate management, climbing the ladder until she landed a position at Procter & Gamble, one of the largest consumer goods companies in the world. It was the kind of job that spoke to years of dedication and professional accomplishment. She made her home in the Carlsbad and Dana Point areas of Southern California. These are upscale coastal communities, the kind of places with manicured lawns, ocean views, and neighbors who wave hello on their morning jogs. Yvonne had a good job, a comfortable home, friends who cared about her, and a family who loved her deeply. By most measures, she had made it. She had achieved the American dream. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. Sometime in her 40s, Yvonne's marriage ended in divorce. The details remain private, but anyone who has gone through a divorce knows the upheaval it brings, the sense of failure, the loneliness, the daunting prospect of starting over when you thought your path was set. And then came another blow. During the late 2000s economic downturn, Yvonne was laid off from her management position at Procter & Gamble. The job she had worked so hard for, the career she had built brick by brick over so many years, gone. Suddenly, the life she had constructed so carefully was crumbling around her. Divorced, unemployed, in her 40s. Many people would have seen this as an ending, a defeat from which there was no recovery. But Yvonne was not most people. Instead of seeing tragedy, she saw opportunity. Instead of dwelling on what she had lost, she focused on what she could gain. This wasn't an ending. It was a chance to reinvent herself completely, to shed her old skin and emerge as something new, to chase the dreams she had perhaps put aside during all those years of climbing the corporate ladder. And that fresh start would come in the form of a new relationship with a man named Brian Brimiger. Brian Carl Brimiger was a retired United States Marine from the Vista and Carlsbad area of Southern California, the same region where Yvonne had built her life. On the surface, Brian seemed like exactly the kind of man a woman might fall for. He was a veteran who had served his country in the Marine Corps. He had that military bearing, confident, assertive, capable. He was charming when he wanted to be, the kind of person who could light up a room and make you feel like you were the only one in it. And he had dreams. Big dreams. Brian wanted to be a singer, to make it in the music industry, to leave behind the structure of military life and pursue his creative passions. He performed in local bars, working on his craft, imagining a future where music was his life. For a woman like Yvonne, recently divorced, starting fresh, looking for excitement and meaning, Brian must have seemed like a breath of fresh air. Here was a man who had served his country, who had dreams and ambitions, who wanted adventure. Here was someone who could be a partner in building something new. Yvonne met Brian sometime around 2009, and the two began dating. For Yvonne, who was navigating the emotional wreckage of her divorce and the professional upheaval of her job loss, Brian represented possibility, excitement, the thrill of a new chapter with someone who saw the world as full of potential. Brian talked about moving somewhere tropical, somewhere they could live simply, away from the pressures and complications of their old lives. Somewhere he could pursue his music career among a community of expats who had also chosen to leave the rat race behind. That place was Bocas del Toro, Panama. Bocas del Toro is an archipelago on Panama's Caribbean coast, a collection of islands that seem almost too beautiful to be real. The water is impossibly turquoise. The beaches are pristine. Jungle-covered islands rise from the sea, their shores dotted with colorful wooden houses built on stilts over the water. In recent decades, Bocas del Toro has become a magnet for a certain kind of dreamer. American and European expats flock there seeking a simpler life, a place where the cost of living is low and the sunsets are spectacular. Backpackers pass through on their way around Central America. Surfers chase the perfect wave, and entrepreneurs open beachfront bars and hostels catering to the steady stream of visitors. For Brian, it was the perfect place to reinvent himself as a musician, performing for tourists and fellow expats at the many bars that line the waterfront. Yvonne was sold on the dream, but she wasn't just following Brian, she had plans of her own. She brought sewing machines with her to Panama, intending to start a clothing and swimwear business catering to the tourists who visited the islands. She saw a market opportunity in this tropical paradise, a chance to combine her business acumen with a new creative venture. She also brought her beloved dog with her. This wasn't just a vacation or a trial run. This was a permanent move. Yvonne was all in. She was burning the ships, committing fully to her new life in paradise. But what Yvonne didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that Brian Brimmiger was living a double life. While he was planning their tropical escape with Yvonne, while he was painting pictures of their future together in Panama, Brian was also deeply involved with another woman back in California. Her name was Kristen Verkhoven. In 2010, Brian had fathered a child with Kristen, a daughter. Even as he packed his bags to move to Panama with Yvonne, even as he made promises about their shared future on a Caribbean island, Brian was emailing Kristen, maintaining that relationship, keeping his options open. Yvonne believed she was building a life with the love of her life. She had left everything behind, her home, her community, her country, to start fresh with this man in paradise. But to Brian Brimmiger, it seems Yvonne may have been something else entirely. A placeholder, a temporary arrangement, an obstacle standing between him and the life he really wanted. In late September 2011, Yvonne and Brian left Southern California behind. They flew to Panama and made their way to Isla Caranero, a small island in the Bocas del Toro archipelago, accessible only by water taxi from the larger Isla Colón. They moved into a small hostel on the island. Life there was simple and rustic, the kind of place where electricity was sometimes unreliable, where you could hear the waves lapping against the dock from your window, and where everyone in the small expat community knew each other's names and business. It was a tight-knit community, American and European expats running small businesses, hostels, dive shops, restaurants, bars, young backpackers passing through, local Panamanians going about their daily lives. In a place like Isla Caranero, strangers became familiar faces quickly. For the first few weeks, things seemed to be going according to plan. Yvonne stayed in close contact with her family back in California through regular emails and phone calls. Her father, Jim, her stepmother, Lillian, and her sister, Michelle Valenzuela, all received updates about her new adventure. She told them about the beautiful sunsets that painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, about her plans for her swimwear business, about the quirky characters in the expat community, about how happy she was to finally be living her dream. But beneath the postcard perfect surface, something dark was brewing. Members of the small expat community on the island began to notice things about Brian and Yvonne's relationship. They saw the couple together at the local bars and restaurants, drinking, socializing, seemingly living the island life. But they also saw something else, something that made them uncomfortable. They witnessed incidents that suggested the relationship was far from idyllic. Multiple witnesses would later tell investigators that they observed Brian being physically violent with Yvonne. They saw bruises on her body, marks that couldn't be easily explained away. They witnessed arguments that crossed the line from verbal to physical. Yvonne had traveled thousands of miles, had uprooted her entire life, had invested everything she had into this dream of paradise. But what she found instead was a relationship that was becoming increasingly dangerous, and a man who was capable of far worse than she could have imagined. And then came Thanksgiving, 2011, November 26th, 2011, Saturday night, 2 days after Thanksgiving. That evening, Yvonne and Brian were seen at a bar and restaurant in Bocas del Toro on Isla Colón. They were having drinks with other expats, socializing, enjoying what appeared to be just another night in their tropical paradise. The music played. The drinks flowed. By all appearances, it was nothing out of the ordinary. When the night wound down, witnesses saw Yvonne leave the bar with Brian. They headed back toward Isla Caranero together, crossing the dark water by boat to their small hostel. It was the last time anyone other than Brian Bremager would see Yvonne Baldelli alive. What happened next would only come to light years later, through painstaking forensic investigation, through witness statements pieced together by the FBI, through court proceedings, and ultimately Brian's own confession. But the horrific truth is this. Sometime after they returned to their hostel that night, Brian Bremager attacked Yvonne. He stabbed her in the back with a knife, but that wasn't enough for him. In an act of unspeakable brutality, Brian then took a machete and dismembered Yvonne's body. He placed her remains in a green military-style backpack, the kind of bag a former Marine would own, and carried them deep into the dense Panamanian jungle that covers much of the island. There, amid the tropical vegetation, he discarded what was left of the woman who had loved him. He also killed Yvonne's dog, the beloved pet she had brought all the way from California to start her new life. And then, with cold calculation and methodical precision, Brian Bremager began the process of erasing Yvonne Baldelli from existence. In the days and weeks following Yvonne's murder, Brian executed a methodical, calculated plan to make it appear that she was still alive and had simply left him for another man. First, he accessed her email account. Using her login credentials, he began sending messages to her family back in California. The emails told a story that Yvonne had met another man, that she had fallen for him quickly, that she had run off with this new love to Costa Rica. She was traveling, the emails claimed. She was happy. She was living her best life. And, critically, she didn't want to be contacted or bothered. Brian wasn't just trying to cover his tracks. He was actively manipulating Yvonne's family, using their love for her against them, making them believe their daughter and sister had simply chosen to cut them out of her new, exciting life. But Brian didn't stop at emails. He also used Yvonne's ATM card to make withdrawals, first from ATMS in Bocas del Toro, and later from ATMS in Costa Rica, to support the false narrative that she had indeed left Panama and was traveling through Central America with her new boyfriend. Meanwhile, he was busy destroying physical evidence. There was the matter of the blood-stained mattress in their hostel, evidence of the violence that had occurred there. Brian disposed of it. He threw Yvonne's personal belongings into garbage bags and got rid of them as well. Investigators would later discover something chilling. In the days immediately following the killing, Brian had used the internet to search for information on how to clean bloodstains from a mattress. He was thinking ahead, covering his tracks, trying to eliminate any evidence that might point to what he had done. By December 2011, Brian had left Panama entirely. He returned to the United States to Southern California as if nothing had happened. And then, on New Year's Eve 2011, just 5 weeks after murdering Yvonne Baldelli and leaving her remains in the jungle, Brian Bremager married Kristen Verkhoven, the mother of his daughter. He had erased Yvonne from his life. He had a new wife, a child, a clean slate, or so he thought. But in the hearts of people who loved Yvonne, something didn't feel right. Yvonne's family had been receiving those emails, the ones supposedly from Yvonne, talking about her new life and her new man in Costa Rica, but the tone was off. The words didn't sound like her. Her father Jim and stepmother Lillian felt uneasy. Her sister Michelle was suspicious. As the weeks went by with no phone calls, no video chats, no real communication, the family's concern turned to alarm. In January 2012, they reported Yvonne missing. They created a Facebook page called Find Yvonne Baldelli to spread awareness and gather information. Later, it would be renamed Justice for Yvonne Baldelli. The family didn't just wait for answers, they went looking for them. Some of them traveled to Panama, hiking through the jungle, searching desperately for any sign of what had happened to their beloved Yvonne. Meanwhile, the FBI had opened an investigation. Because both Yvonne and Brian were American citizens, the FBI had jurisdiction to investigate. The case was handled by the FBI's San Diego division, working in coordination with the FBI's legal attaché office in Panama City, Panamanian authorities, and the U.S. Embassy. On March 21, 2012, FBI agents interviewed Brian Bremager. During that interview, Brian told investigators a series of lies. He claimed Yvonne had left him for another man and gone to Costa Rica. He made false statements about her laptop and other details of her disappearance. But the investigators weren't buying it. The digital trail, the financial records, the witness statements from Panama, everything pointed to Brian. And then, in August 2013, came the breakthrough the family had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. 21 months after Yvonne's disappearance, her remains were discovered in the Panamanian jungle. They were found in a military-style bag, hidden in the dense vegetation, exactly where Brian had discarded them. The family's worst fears had been confirmed. Yvonne was gone, but now they had proof, and they had a target for their pursuit of justice. On June 26, 2013, even before Yvonne's remains were discovered, a federal grand jury had indicted Brian Bremager on charges of obstruction of justice and making false statements to federal agents. He was arrested at his home in Vista, California. But the discovery of Yvonne's remains changed everything. Now prosecutors could pursue the ultimate charge, murder. Under federal law, specifically 18 U.S.C. Section 1119, the United States can prosecute an American citizen for killing another American citizen in a foreign country. The statute requires special authorization from senior officials at the Department of Justice in consultation with the State Department. On March 18, 2015, Assistant Attorney General Leslie R. Caldwell provided that authorization, and on April 17, 2015, a federal grand jury indicted Brian Bremager for first-degree murder of a U.S. national abroad. Brian initially pleaded not guilty. His lawyers filed motions to dismiss the charges, arguing that Panama could handle the case and that Congress lacked the authority to pass the foreign murder statute. U.S. District Judge Jeffrey T. Miller rejected those arguments. And then came the evidence that sealed Brian's fate. FBI forensic analysts examined the machete that Brian had used in Panama. They found Yvonne Baldelli's DNA on it, under the handle, where blood had seeped and remained even after cleaning attempts. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Brian Bremager changed his plea. On February 24, 2016, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder of a U.S. national in a foreign country. 3 months later, on May 25, 2016, he stood before Judge Miller for sentencing. The sentencing hearing was an emotional one. Members of Yvonne's family addressed the court, describing the devastation Brian had caused. They spoke of sleepless nights, of searching through the Panamanian jungle, of the psychological trauma that would never fully heal. Her sister, identified in various reports as Michelle Valenzuela and Michelle Faust, delivered a powerful victim impact statement speaking directly to the pain of losing her sister and the cruelty of Brian's deception. Prosecutors argued for a severe sentence, citing what they called Brian's extreme conduct. They pointed to the brutality of the murder itself, the stabbing, the dismemberment with a machete, the disposal of remains in the jungle. They emphasized the prolonged cover-up, the fake emails, the ATM withdrawals, the lies to investigators. Judge Miller agreed. He characterized the murder as particularly cruel and depraved. Brian Carl Bremager was sentenced to 312 months in federal prison, 26 years. He was also ordered to pay a $10,000 fine and $11,132 in restitution to Yvonne's father. For Yvonne's family, it was a measure of justice, not closure, because how can you ever have closure when you've lost someone you love to such senseless violence? But accountability. The man who had taken Yvonne from them would spend the next quarter century behind bars. But Brian Bremager wasn't done fighting. In 2024, he filed a motion seeking to reduce his sentence. He cited Amendment 821 to the federal sentencing guidelines, which changed how certain criminal history calculations work. Under this amendment, Brian argued, his guidelines range would have been lower. He asked the court to reduce his sentence from 26 years to approximately 23.5 years. The court acknowledged that, technically, Brian was eligible to seek a reduction under the new guidelines. His criminal history category would have dropped from Category 2 to Category 1, and his guidelines range would have been 262 to 327 months instead of 292 to 365 months. But eligibility is not the same as entitlement. On January 13, 2025, a hearing was held on Brian's motion. Yvonne's family was there. Once again, they addressed the court. Once again, they described the ongoing impact of Brian's crimes on their lives. On January 22, 2025, Judge Miller denied Brian's motion. In his ruling, the judge weighed all the factors. Yes, the guidelines had changed, but the crime itself hadn't changed. The stabbing, the dismemberment, The savagery of the aftermath, as the court put it. The elaborate scheme to deceive Yvonne's family into thinking she was alive and well. The 26-year sentence would stand. Brian Bremager remains in federal prison today. Yvonne Baldelli was a woman who dared to dream. After setbacks that would have broken many people, a divorce, a job loss, she chose to see possibility instead of defeat. She chose adventure over safety. She chose to believe in love. Her story is a reminder that predators can wear many masks. That charm can conceal cruelty. That the person sleeping beside you can be a stranger capable of unimaginable violence. It's also a reminder of the power of family, of persistence, of refusing to accept lies when the truth feels wrong. Yvonne's family never stopped fighting for her, not when she was missing, not when her remains were discovered, not when her killer tried to reduce his sentence nearly a decade after his conviction. The Bremager case stands as one of the few examples of the foreign murder statute being successfully used to prosecute an American for killing another American abroad. It required international cooperation between the FBI, Panamanian authorities, and the U.S. Embassy. It required years of investigation. It required the unwavering determination of prosecutors and the courage of a family who refused to let their loved one be forgotten. Yvonne Baldelli went to Panama searching for paradise. She found something else entirely, but in the end, she also found justice. In the spring of 2003, Tyler Edmonds, a boy of only 13 years old, confessed to something that left everyone in shock. He and his half-sister, Christy Fulgham, had killed her husband. What seemed to be a senseless tragedy in an apparently normal home revealed a story of manipulation and betrayal that nobody imagined. But thanks to the courage of Tyler's mother and the tireless efforts of his attorney, the truth came to light, and what appeared to be a tragic accident became one of the most shocking and complex cases in history. This is the case of Tyler Edmonds. Are you ready for the darkest stories Britain has to offer? Introducing our new book, Unreal True Crime, British edition. 35 shocking true murder cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Available now on Amazon in paperback and Kindle, or grab your instant PDF download from our website. Links are in the description below. Don't miss out. Get your copy today. And now, let's continue with today's case. Tyler Edmonds was born on June 14, 1989, in the American state of Mississippi. He was the son of the marriage formed by Sharon Clay and Danny Edmonds. At that time, Danny was already the father of a teenage daughter named Christy, born from a previous relationship. In 1993, when Tyler was about 4 years old, his mother and father divorced, and for various reasons, he was not allowed to maintain contact with his father. As time passed, the boy's desire to see Danny again grew stronger and stronger. It was during this time that Christy became his only refuge. When Tyler was around 12 years old, Christy began organizing weekend meetings so that both could spend time together without the boy's mother knowing. This complicity made Tyler's attachment to his half-sister even stronger. For him, she was the most important person in the world. At that time, Christy was married to Joey Fulgham. The marriage had 3 beautiful children, and in their community, Joey was known for his firm commitment to his family. But despite her husband showering her with love, Christy was not happy. In fact, she began having affairs without discretion. The situation became so serious that the couple appeared on a well-known talk show. During that episode, Christy made a shocking revelation. She openly admitted that her youngest child was not her husband's. Despite this, as she herself acknowledged on the program, Joey decided to continue being that child's father. However, Joey's efforts seemed in vain when around 2002, his wife took the children and moved in with her lover at the time, Kyle Harvey. Yet by May 2003, Christy had returned to live with Joey, and both were trying to save their marriage. Or at least, that's what he believed. Meanwhile, at 13 years old, Tyler was an outstanding student at his middle school. He had no history of violence. He didn't belong to any gang, nor did he show problematic behaviors. On the contrary, he frequently attended his church and respected adults. To those who knew him, he was a kind and affectionate boy, always willing to help and please others. That same kindness, however, would end up becoming his greatest vulnerability. Friday, May 9th of that year, Tyler was excited. His half-sister had promised him that he would spend the weekend at the beach to celebrate Mother's Day together. On the afternoon of that Friday, Christy picked up Tyler and they went to the house where Joey entertained the children and took them to buy food. Upon returning, Joey went to bed while Christy stayed at the computer with Tyler resting near her. In the early morning hours after waking her brother and her children, Christy asked everyone to get in the car while she finished arranging her things to leave. Although Christy took longer than usual to come out, Tyler could only think about how much fun he would have that weekend. After closing the car trunk, she handed him a wallet to store in the glove compartment. Then they took a different route. Christy told him that plans had changed. First, they would go pick up Kyle, and from there, they would travel together to the coast. Once at the beach, they stayed in a hotel, and although she was unemployed, Christy paid for everything with more than $1,000 in cash. While they enjoyed the trip, Joey's brother began to worry. He had spent a good part of the weekend trying unsuccessfully to communicate with him by phone. On Saturday the 10th, his birthday, Joey missed an air show they were supposed to attend together, something completely unusual for him. Sunday, he also gave no signs of life. That's why, by Sunday afternoon, they sensed that something was wrong. His brother went to the house, but no one answered the door. The brother cut through the window screen and entered the house. There, he found a horrifying scene. Joey was lying face down on the bed with no signs of life. Desperate, he called the emergency number. The police arrived quickly. The officers confirmed that Joey had received a gunshot wound to the back of his head, but although they searched the house for evidence, they found no shell casings, nor Joey's wallet. At another point in the city, as they were returning from the trip, Christy's phone began ringing incessantly. After answering, the expression on her face changed. Then she gave Tyler the news of the tragedy. For his part, Joey's brother was direct with the police and said he knew who was guilty. That's how, despite being a grieving widow, Christy became the main suspect. The officers began their search and found her at her mother's house. And although she gave the impression of being innocent, by that time, the police had already gathered enough circumstantial evidence to arrest her. However, she surprised them when she voluntarily presented herself at the sheriff's office with a very disturbing story. What Christy told the police was that Tyler, 13 years old, had become angry when she told him that her husband was abusing her. That night, according to her version, Tyler waited for Joey to fall asleep, went into his room, lifted the rifle, and opened fire. When they heard this, the agents contacted Sharon and asked her to bring her son to make a statement. Once there, the mother was separated, and another officer led Tyler to the interrogation room. That was the beginning of the ordeal. For hours, Tyler denied having anything to do with Joey's death. He didn't understand why they were asking so many questions, but when they told him what Christy had said, he was completely shocked. He couldn't believe that his beloved sister was accusing him of such a horrible crime. The weight of her betrayal felt unbearable. The officers continued pressing him relentlessly. They told him it was better to confess, that Christy had already told them everything, and that this was his chance to tell his side of the story. Tyler, confused, scared, and feeling completely alone, began to break down. He was just a child facing trained interrogators without his mother or an attorney present. The pressure was overwhelming. Finally, after hours of interrogation, exhausted and terrified, Tyler said what they wanted to hear. He confessed. According to his statement, he and Christy had both held the gun together and fired at Joey while he slept. He described details about how it happened, how the pillow was covered in blood, and how they left the scene. The police had their confession. The case seemed closed, but there was something very wrong with this picture. Tyler Edmonds was not a violent child. He had no motive. He had no history of aggression. And most importantly, the physical evidence would soon reveal that his confession couldn't possibly be true. Tyler found himself facing murder charges. At 13 years old, he was looking at spending the rest of his life behind bars for a crime his sister had committed and pinned on him. His mother, Sharon, was devastated but determined. She knew her son was innocent. She knew that Christy had manipulated him, used him, and then betrayed him in the most horrific way possible. Sharon would stop at nothing to save her son. She found an attorney named Steve Faris, a lawyer known for taking on difficult cases and not giving up easily. After reviewing the file, the attorney was certain that this time his client was telling the truth. Tyler wanted to recant his confession, to tell the real story of what happened. But the judge refused to admit the change in Tyler's statement, allowing only the first confession as evidence. When the trial began on July 20, 2004, the experts knew the power that a confession had as a strong piece of evidence, even if there were indications that it was coerced or false. During the development of the process, a highly respected forensic pathologist stated that according to his analysis, the trajectory of the bullet was consistent with Tyler's version. As an expert, he said there were two pairs of hands on the weapon and maintained that this could be deduced from the angle of the wound on Joey's head. In the end, the verdict was devastating. Life in prison without the possibility of parole until age 65. The sentence was so harsh that even Joey's family felt compassion for Tyler. Meanwhile, unable to give up, and above all convinced that the errors in the process had been too many, Tyler's lawyer bet that the trial would have to be repeated. Therefore, he continued working on the case. But either way, Tyler remained in the correctional center. As a single mother with limited resources, Sharon had only one option: give up everything to save her son. And that's what she did. Although she would be in debt for the rest of her life, Sharon had no doubt that saving her son was priceless. She would sacrifice everything. She sold her belongings, worked multiple jobs, and dedicated every waking moment to fighting for Tyler's freedom. The appeals process was long and full of defeats. The initial appeal was rejected by the circuit court and then by the state appeals court. Tyler's case generated intense public debate and even prompted new legislation driven by state legislators who considered the sentence too severe for someone so young. His lawyer kept insisting until, in 2007, the ruling was overturned after the judge discovered that the pathologist who had examined Joey's body had acted outside his field of specialization by affirming before the jury that two people had fired the weapon. But the state didn't want a new trial, so they offered Tyler, now 18 years old, a plea deal for involuntary manslaughter. If he accepted it, his sentence would be drastically reduced to the point of getting out of prison in just a few months. On the other hand, if he went to trial again and was convicted, it would be life in prison. In the end, both he and his lawyer decided to fight tirelessly to prove his innocence. Meanwhile, the process against Christie continued, and after her trial, she was found guilty and received a death sentence. Additionally, she was convicted and sentenced to 12 years in prison for convincing two men to help her attempt to escape from jail. The true picture of who Christie Fulgham really was began to emerge. She was not the caring sister Tyler had believed in. She was a manipulator, a sociopath who had used her own brother as a scapegoat for murder. The evidence against her was overwhelming. She had multiple life insurance policies on Joey. She had asked her own father for a gun to kill her husband, even offering him a new car in exchange. She had affairs with multiple men and showed no remorse for her actions. Tyler's new trial began on October 28, 2008. The defense opened the proceedings with a forceful statement, affirming that not only had he been accused unfairly, but that everything had been based on a completely false confession. When it came time to call witnesses, the first person the defense cited was Christie herself. At that moment, everyone in the courtroom held their breath, but with each question, she invoked the Fifth Amendment and refused to answer, following her attorney's instructions. Paradoxically, far from being a setback for Tyler's defense, that stance ended up benefiting him because it allowed the jury to directly perceive Christie's attitude and character. But that wasn't all. The defense presented an unexpected weapon: the video of Christie's television appearance with Joey. That recording exposed her capacity to manipulate, maintaining multiple relationships at once, some even with her husband's knowledge. Then Tyler's lawyer focused on the true motive for the crime. Christie was seeking to collect several life insurance policies in Joey's name. When Danny took the stand, the most explosive revelation came. His daughter had asked him for a weapon to take her husband's life, all to collect the policy. According to his testimony, Christie even offered him a new car in exchange. After that series of setbacks for the prosecution, the prosecutor stood up to present his argument, and the first thing he mentioned was Tyler's confession. He knew it was the most powerful element in his favor. When questioned about it, Tyler was forceful. He had lied to protect his sister, but the prosecutor replied that this only suggested he was also capable of lying to protect himself. With the case against him, Tyler's lawyer requested that an expert on false confessions testify, but the judge denied it. It was a very hard blow for the defense. Even so, the lawyer had one last resource: to use the main physical evidence in favor of his client based on his own account of what he supposedly saw after opening fire. In that initial confession, Tyler described that after the bullet's impact, the pillow was covered with bloodstains. The defense then called another pathologist who declared that the weapon used could not have caused the damage described by Tyler back then. The crime scene photos supported that analysis. There was no trace of blood on the pillows. The scene was immaculate, and there was no evidence of cleanup. On October 31, 2008, the last day of the trial, the judge agreed to let the jury hear Tyler's second statement. There was silence in the courtroom. It was a very intense moment because, for the first time, the jury had access to details like his mention of the gunshot outside the house. Next, Tyler took the stand to reveal that during the trip Christie confessed to him what she had done. Then she described the story she wanted him to tell when the police interrogated them. She even told him she would give him a signal when it was time to change his story and take the blame. So when the police brought her in during the interrogation, he believed that was the signal. He thought he was protecting his sister, doing what she needed him to do. He trusted her completely. Tyler testified about the manipulation, about how Christie had groomed him for years, using their relationship and his love for her against him. He explained how isolated he felt during the interrogation, how scared he was, and how he just wanted it to end. The defense painted a clear picture: a vulnerable 13-year-old boy, desperate for connection with his father's side of the family, manipulated by a cunning older sister who saw him as nothing more than a convenient patsy for murder. Finally, after tense deliberation, the jury found Tyler not guilty. Upon hearing the verdict, the young man embraced his lawyer and his loved ones. Eager to free himself from such a weight on his shoulders, Tyler felt like he was collapsing for the first time in years. Time later, he would still remember those liberating words as if he were hearing them for the first time. When interviewed outside the courthouse, visibly emotional, Tyler thanked God for hearing his prayers and said he was glad to be able to move on with his life. Tyler had to start from scratch, and the first thing he did was leave Mississippi. His story also put under scrutiny the career of the pathologist whose excesses led to the conviction of two other men who were later released in 2008 after their innocence was proven through DNA and the confession of the real culprit. The state of Mississippi removed him from the list of approved pathologists, and several of his victims were released while others obtained new trials. As for Christie, she appealed her sentence, and in 2010 it was overturned. Instead, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Tyler himself has recounted, the last time he heard from her was at the end of 2008 when she sent him a letter of apology. However, she was not able to tell him exactly what she was apologizing for, which infuriated him. It was typical of Christie. Even in her apology, she couldn't take full responsibility for what she had done. After learning about this shocking story, some experts highlighted how Christie managed to deeply manipulate her brother, using him as a scapegoat. According to these specialists, her behavior showed traits associated with narcissism and sociopathy: lack of empathy, self-preservation instinct, and a tendency to project her guilt onto others. Thus, while most people would seek to protect their loved ones, in Christie's case, her personal interest predominated, evidencing a distorted moral structure capable of considering even the closest relatives expendable. This case raises profound questions about the vulnerability of children in the criminal justice system. Tyler was interrogated for hours without his mother present, without an attorney, by trained professionals who knew exactly how to extract a confession. The fact that a 13-year-old child could be convicted on the basis of a confession obtained under such circumstances is deeply troubling. It highlights the need for better protections for minors in the justice system, including mandatory presence of parents or guardians during interrogations, and better training for law enforcement on the phenomenon of false confessions. Studies have shown that juveniles are particularly susceptible to giving false confessions. They are more likely to be influenced by authority figures, more likely to have difficulty understanding their rights, and more likely to believe that confessing will lead to leniency or that the truth will eventually come out. Tyler's case is a textbook example of these dynamics at play: a vulnerable child, desperate for his sister's approval, isolated from his support system, and facing the overwhelming pressure of law enforcement accusation. The case of Tyler Edmonds is a stark reminder of how easily justice can go wrong, especially when it comes to vulnerable populations like children. It's a story of manipulation, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of a false confession. but it's also a story of hope, of a mother's unwavering love, of an attorney's dedication, and of a young man's resilience. Tyler Edmonds lost 5 years of his life to a crime he didn't commit, 5 years during which he should have been finishing high school, going to prom, starting college, experiencing all the normal milestones of adolescence and young adulthood. Instead, he was locked away, labeled a murderer, facing the prospect of spending the rest of his life behind bars. The psychological toll of such an experience is immeasurable. Yet Tyler survived. He came through the other side, cleared of all charges, able to reclaim his life and his future. He is a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure even the darkest circumstances. As for Christy Fulgham, she remains in prison where she belongs. Her actions destroyed multiple lives. Joey, the husband she murdered for insurance money. Tyler, the brother she manipulated and betrayed. Her own children, who lost both their father and their mother, and countless others touched by this tragedy. Now that you know the details of this tragic story, what do you think? Was it fair that Tyler, being a minor, was interrogated without the presence of his mother or an attorney? To what extent do you think that situation could have influenced his confession and the development of the case? This case should make us all think carefully about how we treat children in the criminal justice system, about the reliability of confessions, and about the evil that people are capable of, even toward their own family members. Thank you for watching this documentary on the Tyler Edmonds case. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below, always with respect for the victims and their families. If you found this content valuable, please subscribe and leave a like until the next story.